I'll quickly run back over that. I did just want to start by thanking everyone for your patience with me over the last week and a half or so. This is a sort of an ongoing chronic injury thing that flares up occasionally, and I think we went up to Sydney over Easter, and I think it just flared up as a result of spending a lot of hours in the car, which was probably not a great idea. So I did just want to say thanks everyone for your understanding, and quite a few of you have sent lovely messages of support, which I have seen and I do really, really appreciate. So thank you very much for that. I guess I'll just ask that continue to be patient with me. It is feeling a little bit better today. I did go and get some treatment today, but yeah, it may flare up again before the end of semester. With that in mind, though, I suppose after this lecture material that I'll go through today, there's nothing else, I suppose, in terms of formal delivery of content or material. All the readings are all wrapped up and everything now. So I suppose what I would encourage you to do, you can sort of make decisions about your own time, but in terms of class time, I suppose that's a really good opportunity for people to come together at the same time, particularly if your groups are kind of geographically dispersed. You know that this time now is the time where you can sort of come together, work on the project, and get things done. I was talking to some groups on Monday, and some of them were just saying, look, we just want to get things approved as soon as possible. I had some, 2 groups emailed me within the class asking for approval, and I sent it back, and they just wanted to get going straight away so that they could kind of finish it up, hopefully by the end of next week. I think they were sort of talking about, which is kind of crazy, but they said, look, we've got a really busy end of semester coming up, and this is, something that we just want to wrap up so we can focus on our other courses. I said, yep, fantastic, that sounds great. So I think it's a fairly straightforward assessment. It's a little bit bigger, obviously, than the other 2, but it should be fairly straightforward in terms of you putting together something speculative. That's what it is. It's a speculative piece of environmental communication, maybe with some samples or maybe with a pilot podcast if that's what you're doing or whatever, but just some sample material, a strategy document or some accompanying documents sort of explaining what the strategy is. And then there's some other formal material, which I went through last Friday. Quite a few of you were at that presentation, which was great. If you have any questions, make sure you put them in the chat or ask me later on after we get through this lecture material to start with. But yeah, like I said, thank you everyone for your patience. And yeah, so in terms of Eco Futures, it was a title that I just kind of put in the schedule as I was putting the course together, not really thinking too much. It just sounded like a cool thing to have at the end. I didn't really think that much about it. But as we've moved through the materials, as we've moved through the course, and as I've had kind of conversations with you all and read through your assessments, speaking of which assignment 2, obviously I've had to delay marking on that, but the results should be with you by mid next week. So again, thank you for your patience there. But in reading through some of those, I decided that Eco Futures would be a great moment, if you like, to talk about some visions of the future that we may encounter in popular culture. Quite a few of you looked at films, documentaries for assignment 2, which is great. And I think that's kind of, certainly for me at least, that's where in films and books is kind of where my understanding, my comprehension, whenever I think of the future, that's kind of what I think of as certain films and books. But it's also worth, thinking about some of the themes or ideas that are raised in those films or books alongside the conversations and the things that are happening now. So I guess I'll start with 2020, which is kind of an interesting place to start, and I hope it's not too triggering for all of us. But 2020, I suppose, is an interesting one for me because generations have these markers, I suppose, depending on when you're born, you have these markers that are kind of way off in the future that people will talk about all the time as kind of being in the future. So if you listen to the current Australian government talking about their climate commitments, they'll talk about 2050, which is kind of somewhere off in the future. But I was born in 1987. I'm a millennial, so for me growing up, there were two dates, I suppose, that kind of marked the future for me as I was sort of in my approaching my teens and into my early teens, and they were the year 2000 with Y2K and all that sort of stuff, which was, if you don't know what I'm talking about, effectively everyone was concerned that all the computers were going to crash once we moved over to the year 2000, because everyone thought that the dates in all the computer code only had 2 digits for the year. So when it went from 99 to 00, everyone was terrified that the world was going to end, or at least computers weren't going to work. Turns out it was just a huge nothing. Nothing happened, obviously. We're all still here. So the year 2000 was a big thing. It was also the Sydney Olympics. So certainly in this part of the world, it was kind of crazy. Everyone was really excited for that. Years ahead of the event, there were news stories about the mascots and the designs and the logos and the planning for that. Yeah, so it was kind of an interesting moment. And I find the movies around that time that were coming out were really interesting, like The Matrix and The Day After Tomorrow and Existenz, all these weirdo movies that were kind of dealing with a whole bunch of issues around technology and identity and interesting things. But so it was the year 2000, and I guess once we got past that, it was ironically now it's ironic, but it was 2020. Everyone sort of talked about 2020 as being 2020 vision, 2020 hindsight. We're going to get to 2020 and everything's going to be great. And then certainly as we moved further through the noughties and into the 2010s, when things started kind of going from bad to worse and climate started being a big issue, lots of natural sort of disasters and bushfires, and we could see what was happening around us. And then mid 2010s, you had the presidential election after, 2 terms of semi-progressive Obama administration, for better or worse. And then, we had Trump for 4 years. So approaching 2020, it was kind of like, oh, it's election time again. Come on, maybe we can sort of move forward from this weird time in terms of the Trump administration into maybe better times ahead. And then, we sort of got to 2019, and then life sort of had other plans.
As the year and the decade comes to an end, the country is burning. It's been labelled the worst fire season ever recorded, an apocalypse, a nightmare, and like looking into the gates of hell. From the New South Wales-Victoria border all the way to the Central Coast, 9 blazes reached emergency warning level today. Here's what we know right now. 2 men believed to be a father and son were killed trying to defend their home in the south coast town of Cobargo overnight. A 72-year-old man is still unaccounted for in the nearby town of Ballowra. The RFS says dozens of homes have been destroyed. And late today, police warned all telecommunications, including mobile services and the internet, will be lost tonight on the south coast between Nowra and Moruya. Tonight, we have reporters standing by across the region with the latest information. First to Jade McMillan near Cobargo, where those 2 men died. Jade, what do we know about the tragedy?
Locals there have told us that the fire that swept through their small community was terrifying. There is believed to be significant damages to buildings. Photos from the main street show rubble where businesses should be standing, and residents say that embers started spot fires right throughout that area and the fire moved incredibly quickly.
Kind of want to go home but can't go home yet, so yeah, just planning on where to go from here.
As firefighters battle these horrendous conditions, you can hear gas bottles exploding just a few kilometres from here, and people have come here to the water where they feel safer.
Spot fires arrived under raging winds, with many residents choosing to stay and protect.
Looks like it's jumped the highway. Yeah, I don't think there's anything left.
Daniel Marshall spent today fighting to save a mate's house, just a day after his family lost their own home.
It's the most intense thing that I've ever experienced. House was saved, shed gone, everyone's alive.
Paul Carroll lost all but his car.
So it's weird, like in the context of the last 2 years, 2.5 years now, how distant that seems. But in that kind of moment, sort of late 2019, early 2020, for about 2 or 3 months, it was definitely the worst bushfire season here on record for quite some time. Black Christmas, I think they call it now. But certainly since, the Black Saturday fires in Victoria were horrific back in 2009, but they were, I suppose, contained to, one state, one region, whereas these fires sort of stretched, as you saw on that map on the news bulletin, they stretched from, eastern Victoria all the way up into southern Queensland. And those spectacular satellite images of the eastern seaboard of Australia with just the smoke trails, it was like the whole right side of Australia was just on fire. It was a vision of the apocalypse. Like they said, it's kind of this apocalyptic hellscape thing that you just don't expect to see. And what was, I suppose, particularly interesting, which hadn't really happened much, and certainly not as much, was for those that were in Melbourne, you'll remember the smoke coming into the city and covering the city, and people having to wear masks to sort of protect their lungs and their systems from the smoke and from the dust particles that were coming in and the ash and so on. What I said, there wasn't much good about that at all. There, virtually nothing. In terms of moving forward from that, what I suppose was interesting was that conversations began about what it meant to have such an event at such a scale at the same time. The summers aren't getting any cooler in Australia. So unless kind of radical action is taken, not just in a planetary sense, but certainly at least in a bushfire preparation and reparation sense. There are people from Black Saturday that are still waiting for insurance payouts, still waiting to have their homes rebuilt and so on. But at least it sort of started conversations about what this means to have such events and to know that more events like this were coming. We have had a couple of cooler, mercifully, we have had a couple of cooler summers since then, but that's just because of sort of the La Nina system. Once that sort of moves through its cycle and into the next phase, we're going to have more hot temperatures and more chance of bushfires. But that was sort of pushed, I suppose, out of the consciousness because of another very, very little thing that was happening around the same.
Good evening. The city, at the heart of a public health crisis in China, is shutting its public transport network to try to prevent the spread of a virus that's already infected hundreds of people. As millions across the country prepare to travel for the Lunar New Year celebrations, the coronavirus has already claimed the lives of 17 people, but the number is expected to rise sharply. Now, the virus was first detected in the city of Wuhan at the end of last year, and that's where the majority of cases have been reported. A handful have since been detected in other parts of Asia, and last night, the first case in the United States was confirmed. The main symptoms of the virus include breathing difficulties, fever, and coughing. But in vulnerable people, especially among the elderly, it can lead to organ failure, pneumonia, and death. There's no treatment, so prevention is a top priority. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh has more details.
This is the epicenter of the outbreak. Hospitals in Wuhan are overwhelmed.
It's kind of eerie, isn't it, watching that now? But that was 23rd, 24th of January 2020 was that news report. So it is kind of strange. But I guess what I was getting to was this idea of futures, and when you think about the future, or when you read a futuristic novel, you know, the apocalypse is that, right? It's kind of, whether it's a zombie thing, you know, that's usually a virus, or whether it's a virus, you know, that sort of takes hold of the population, you know, that it's a pandemic, it's natural disaster, it's everything on fire, it's sort of the earth rupturing. These are kind of the dystopian post-apocalyptic visions that are, you know, that you read about in popular culture. So it was kind of, you know, beyond just the, I suppose, the sheer terror, and, you know, certainly for me, it was the first time that I'd really just invested my whole soul and energy into doom scrolling, as we all did, I suppose, for a little while. That started for me, at least, with the bushfires, because I've got family. My partner and I have family that are in areas that are usually affected. You know, to sort of now be able, I suppose, with some hindsight, even though everything's still ongoing, to sort of step back and go, oh, that's the post-apocalyptic, that's the apocalypse, that's sort of, it's fire, flood, famine, all that stuff that has been going on for a long time, but never at such a scale as we've seen it in the last couple of years. So I think how we talk about the future is interesting, and seeing some of it come true is both terrifying, and also, you know, I suppose, intellectually an interesting exercise to work through. A lot of this course up until now has been about the now, or at least the very recent past. So I suppose it's probably worth thinking about visions of the future. What stories have been told about the planet's future? What are we meant to take from them, in terms of lessons, I suppose, ideas, but also, what can we take from them realistically for the now, for the moment that we're currently living in? And how might this inform, I suppose, some of your interventions for the final assessment? What kind of future are you going to sell, I suppose, with your interventions? So the first part that I was going to work through was this idea of a dystopia. So it's kind of a vision of the future where things haven't gone that great. So you're thinking of things like High Rise, like Snowpiercer, like A Handmaid's Tale, 12 Monkeys, whether it's kind of an environmental, ecological collapse, or whether it's something to do with a disease or a virus or a mutation. Zombies, I would argue, you know, zombie movies and zombie outbreaks would kind of fall into this category, where there's some kind of outbreak or cataclysmic thing that happens that causes an evolution or a devolution. Over the Easter break, I read the Wayward Pines series, and there's a TV series adaptation of it as well, which is kind of an interesting take on it. I guess one of my favorites is a film from 2007, which is very, very old now, I've just realized, a bit like me. But it's kind of an interesting take, and the more I watch it and use it in teaching, the more I realize how much it shaped my ideas about environment, society, humanity, etc., etc. So I'll just play the opening of this film.
And he's definitely got the inside track. Word is that they're having some problems with injuries.
Really? And are they looking into free agent signings last second, anything like that? Or
possibly. And they've got a strong farm club, too. They've got some AAA ball players they might be bringing up. But again, Peter would certainly be able to tell us a little more about that in the next half hour.
Who do you like?
Well, I'm telling you, so far, I like what I'm seeing in New York. They've got a strong ball club as usual. That's in the American. And in the National, I'm still liking Chicago with a little bit of a twist here for Los Angeles.
Okay, so we're looking at New York, Chicago, World Series possible, Los Angeles. You've got it here. Hey, hold him to it at the end of the season. That's going to do it for us from the Sports Desk right now. Back to you guys in the studio. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for nothing, Eddie.
Thank you, guys. That's not all we're following. Here's Karen at the Health Desk.
The world of medicine has seen its share of miracle cures, from the polio vaccine to heart transplants, but all past achievements may pale in comparison to the work of Dr. Alice Crippen. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So, Dr. Crippen, give it to me in a nutshell.
Well, the premise is quite simple. Take something designed by nature and reprogram it to make it work for the body rather than against it.
You're talking about a virus?
Indeed, yes. In this case, the measles virus, which has been engineered at a genetic level to be helpful rather than harmful. And I find the best way to describe it is if you can imagine your body as a highway and you picture the virus as a very fast car being driven by a very bad man, imagine the damage that car could cause. But then if you replace that man with a cop, the picture changes, and that's essentially what we've done.
How many people have you treated so far?
Well, we've had 10,009 clinical trials in humans so far.
And how many are cancer-free?
10,009.
So you have actually cured cancer?
Yes, yes. Yes, we have.
What you say?
It's interesting, again, like the more I rewatch that opening, the less I become less interested in what happens once the car and Will Smith's character turn up. I really love those scenes of Manhattan that are just like completely overgrown, and I think that's an interesting take on what can happen, right? If a lot of humanity perishes for some reason, those urban spaces being reclaimed. I think there's kind of a fascination that I have with those sorts of scenes. There's kind of a beauty, I suppose, this sort of grotesque beauty to scenes like that, and that visual, that kind of aesthetic, if you like, I think has been translated and used quite a bit in video games. So I'm thinking of things like The Last of Us and Horizon Zero Dawn kind of play into that fascination of, if anyone's seen the original Planet of the Apes, for example, that final scene where you kind of realize that where this is all taking place, there's kind of that whole game, Horizon Zero Dawn, for me was about kind of that thing of like, oh, we're walking through this huge metal structure. It's metal, we don't really know what it is, and then you sort of see a light tower and you kind of see the curve of a grandstand and you realize you're in an old dilapidated stadium. And I think there's kind of a beauty a beauty in that. And another, I suppose, practice and attendant media form that plays into that is the idea of urban exploration. There's a wonderful book by a scholar. He's a scholar, but he's also an anthropologist and an urban explorer called Bradley Garrett. And he goes into quite a lot of detail, wonderful philosophical detail about why people are drawn to spaces that are under construction, spaces that are barred or forbidden or closed off for whatever reason. So places like Chernobyl and other spaces, kind of abandoned army bases and things all around the world. People are drawn to these spaces to sort of see a world without us and to sort of experience things that, particularly in the case of Chernobyl or Battleship Island off the coast of Japan, places that have been kind of left frozen in time, you know, when people kind of left very quickly. There's kind of an eeriness to those spaces, which could potentially tie into this vision of the far future, right, where it's just sort of everything's abandoned and overgrown and there aren't many of us left for whatever reason. So that's, you know, that's kind of a dystopian vision, but, you know, depending on whose side you're on, whether you're on the side of, I suppose, human or non-human, maybe that is a utopia. But the other side of it is a utopian vision of the future, and there are a couple of different variations of utopia when it comes to eco-futures, I suppose. One of them is kind of tied in with that idea of urban spaces, human spaces being reclaimed by nature, or for whatever reason technology breaks down, stops working. In the case of this wonderful book that I spoke about a couple of weeks ago, A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. In the case of that book, technology just decides that it's not worth it. You know, they've built all these robots that are sort of semi-sentient or mostly sentient, and they just decide they've had enough and they walk away. They remove themselves from the factories and from all the infrastructure that we've inserted them into, and they go away. They walk away into the forest, and no one's seen or heard from robots for quite some time. But the genesis of the story, I suppose, is this human, this monk character, becomes kind of obsessed with what's in the forest, goes off the beaten track and encounters a robot, and thus begins this kind of journey and interaction between these two characters that is incredibly moving. And I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It's very, very short book, and a very, very lovely, sweet book. And I can't wait for the second one, which should be coming out later this year, maybe next year. So yeah, that's one vision, I suppose, of a utopia. If you're not on the side of, you know, if you kind of are on the side of humanity, or if you're more on the side of like appreciating nature and so on, this sort of green future where we've moved on from kind of our material concerns and perhaps learnt to maybe meet a little bit more in the middle with the natural world. So I suppose that's one vision of the future. And the other side of it is a kind of techno-utopia. And as an example of that, I've got a clip from a film from, good God, I think it's almost 10 years ago now. But
We're not doing well. I've been going in circles for an hour.
Okay, you have not. You're just not being optimistic. You're being very stubborn right now. Okay, stop walking this direction. It's the other way. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, the tunnel on the left is the only one we haven't tried.
No, I think that's the one you sent me down where I fell in the pit.
Okay, I don't think so.
Oh, yeah, this is different. Hello? Do you know how to get out of here? I need to find my ship to get off this planet.
Fuck you, shithead, fuckface, fuckhead.
Okay, but do you know how to get out of here?
Fuck you, shithead, fuckface. Get the fuck out of my face.
I think it's a test.
Fuck you.
Fuck you.
Well, fuck you, little shit.
Follow me, fuckhead.
Hey, you just got an email from Mark Luman.
What are you talking about?
Read email.
Okay, I will read email for Theodore Twombly.
I'm sorry. What's Lumen say?
Theodore, we missed you last night, buddy. Don't forget it's your goddaughter's birthday on the 29th. Also, Kevin and I had somebody we wanted you to meet. So we took it upon ourselves to set you up on a date with her. Next Saturday, she's fun and beautiful, so don't back out. Here's her email. Wow, this woman is gorgeous. She went to Harvard, she graduated magna cum laude in computer science, and she was on the Lampoon. So that means she's funny and she's brainy.
Ah, she's fat.
Theodore, how long before you're ready to date?
What do you mean?
I saw in your emails that you'd gone through a breakup recently.
Well, you're kind of nosy.
Am I?
I've gone on dates.
Well, then you can go on one with this woman. And then you could tell me all about it. You could kiss her.
Samantha?
What? Wouldn't you? Why not?
I don't know. I'd have to see if there was some. I can't believe I'm having this conversation on my computer.
You're not. You're having this conversation with me. You want me to email her? We've got nothing to lose. Do it. Do it. Do it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Email her.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Let's do it. Make a reservation someplace great.
Yeah? Oh, I've got just the place.
Who's that talking?
Oh, that's my friend Samantha.
Is she a girl?
Yeah.
I hate women. All they do is cry all the time.
That's not true. You know, men cry too. I actually like crying sometimes. It feels good.
I didn't know you were a little pussy. Is that why you don't have a girlfriend? I'll go out that.
Yes, 2013. Wow. Yeah, a really interesting take on the utopia, dystopia, techno-utopia, I guess, divide. It was sort of seen as a bit of a, what if Siri became more developed? It was kind of released in that sort of span of films that included things like Ex Machina and so on. I think it's been a fascination for a long time around, if we sort of keep going down this AI machine learning route, what could happen? And that's kind of an interesting way to think about the future, I suppose. But you've got things like Gattaca, Her, obviously, Interstellar, Blade Runner, and Blade Runner 2049 as kind of examples of, when techno-utopia, when development can kind of go for good and for ill. And it's connected, I suppose, to that idea of techno-washing, which I may have spoken about, but it's this idea that we can simply innovate and invent our way out of the climate crisis, as opposed to just taking rational steps or using things that are currently in development that might take a little bit longer, but are kind of more or less guaranteed to work to reduce emissions and make sustainable choices. So there's this quote from Ribeiro, Soromenho Marquez, from their article, which I think I put in the resources section. The term techno-washing that we use here consists of organizational and political laundry by, on the one hand, promoting excessive optimism about techno-scientific solutions as the sole solution to the problem, and on the other hand, promoting megalomaniac technology-related ideas in order to deflect attention from the real problems. And if that's sort of sparking ideas of certain personalities that have been in the news a lot recently, but quite a bit over the last few years, then yes, that's kind of between Bill Gates and between Elon Musk and these sorts of figures who, I think Gates is a little bit less malevolent, but they believe very strongly in this idea that if we can just throw enough money and technology at the problem, it'll just go away. And I think what the science community particularly, and the people that I've been talking to that are working in environmental science and so on, at RMIT at least, I don't know if it's the same elsewhere, they're sort of very much on the side of, hey, we do have solutions to these problems, but they need money. We've been working on this stuff for years. We don't have any funding because, particularly in the case of Australia, we have a government that sort of vetoes such research in favor of big technological solutions. So that's kind of an interesting perspective. I guess the third and I suppose final part of the lecture was going to be about specifically the now. and what sort of things are happening. There's an interesting, related to that question of existing research and things that are ongoing at the moment. The film 2040 by Damon Gameau, which some of you may have seen. Gameau also made That Sugar film quite a few years ago. Sort of looks at some of these existing technologies and the people behind them and how effective they are. And, you know, spoilers, they're all very effective as long as they can find funding and as long as they can be rolled out with some kind of consistency across different countries, not just, you know, in isolation. So that's an interesting kind of way to think about, like, I suppose, our now and our immediate future. The other way is to look at initiatives like the B Corp certification. I've just got a quick little video that sort of explains what that is.
Throughout history, humankind has created a multitude of different economic and social systems. Traditional systems, absolutism, feudalism, communism, capitalism, the list goes on. And while systems are complex, the truth is they were built by people, so they can be changed by people. After all, humanity is interdependent with one another and with the planet. The problem is, this is often forgotten, and short-term gains are prioritized over long-term value. Me over we, now over the future, inequity over justice, profits over people and planet. Leading to this, and this. All of which are negative impacts of our current economic system. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can transform from profiting only the few to benefiting all, from concentrating wealth and power to ensuring equity, from extraction to regeneration, and from individualism to interdependence. It is not an unreachable ideal. It is the reality that we, the B Corp movement, are already building. All around the world, we enable companies to improve their social and environmental impact with our standards and tools. We certify and engage businesses that meet these standards. We catalyse public policies that expand businesses' accountability beyond just to shareholders. We steward communities and collective action and amplify the stories of people using business as a force for good. The B Corp movement, led by B Lab and Sistema Bay, positively impacts nearly 300,000 workers at over 4,000 companies in over 150 industries and 77 countries. Together, we're transforming the global economy to benefit all people, communities, and the planet. Together, we'll realise our vision of an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative world. Join the movement.
So I suppose it would be easy to watch that and think, oh yeah, it's just more sort of greenwashing, more corporate spin, but they're actually a separate non-profit entity who actually do believe in all of these things and are actively working, like they said, across various different countries and industries to enable existing companies and industries to make changes towards, you know, that sort of shared goal. I guess I encountered the B Corp thing primarily in our area. There's a lot of development going on, and I became kind of fascinated and horrified by it in equal measure. And I was just sort of looking things up and came across the logo and wondered what it was and why only a few developers had that certification. And as the video sort of says, these are companies who have made themselves accountable to this set of standards around equality and sustainability and future-proofing and so on. So I just thought it was kind of a cool thing. I didn't realize how big it was as well and how many companies had signed up to it. So that was a tiny, tiny little spark of hope, tiny little spark of good news in the midst of everything else. But I thought it was an interesting thing to share. yeah, it's a designation that a business is meeting high standards of verified performance, accountability, and transparency on factors from employee benefits and charitable giving to supply chain practices and input materials, which is just kind of an interesting thing. I suppose to finish up, I would maybe ask you to think about, go back to, God, what was it, week 3 or 4, when we heard from our activist friends about this idea of the system, and, you know, fight the system, challenge the system, work within the system, work outside the system, disrupt the system, whatever kind of approach as an activist or just as a sort of functioning member of society you are taking. Thinking about the future necessitates a stepping back, a kind of observation of things as a whole. And I suppose that's kind of what you'll be doing with your final assessment. Doing research into your chosen area and thinking about realistically what can change. So some thought definitely needs to go into that for this final assessment. This is where you sort of smush all the different parts of the previous 2 assessments together in terms of figuring out what kind of environmental communication is going to best serve what you want to change with your strategy or with your product. What is actually able to be changed and what is the best way to affect that change? And it's kind of a way, I guess, to leave the course thinking about some of those issues, maybe not the biggest issues. I think certainly for assignment 1, a lot of you looked at huge things like ocean plastics and deforestation and you know, huge issues that definitely aren't going to be solved overnight. But I think what's interesting about this larger assignment is that I actually want you to think about smaller issues. I know it says in the assessment that, you know, do something that one of you did in assignment 1, but I actually think, as I said on Friday, I think it's actually even a better strategy to look at where you are in your local area, wherever that might be, whether that's in Australia or elsewhere. Look at your local area, look at some of the issues that are happening there. I think that's a really good place to start. You know, could you do a social media campaign or a print poster campaign in one of your group members' local council areas? I know you're sort of dispersed, whether it's a local sort of precinct or local council area or government area. You know, is there something about recycling or compost or traffic or congestion or pollution or green spaces or, you know, something like that, you know, that could be influenced in a particular way by environmental communication? I suppose, what kind of future do you want for where you are? Immediate future, not like huge distant 50-year future, but like, what realistically could we do to kind of raise awareness of an issue or encourage people to do something or to take action? So that's kind of it. That's the Ecofutures spiel. Any questions, concerns, fears, doubts? I'll quickly stop.